What's going on, family? Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten FISTICUFFS Series Part 2. My top 10 greatest fighters of all times. Ray Robinson's the greatest pound-for-pound fighter of all times, but he's my number 3 ranked greatest fighter of all times. And in video 1, we talked about Sam Langford, who's my ranked number 1 greatest fighter. Talked about Harry Greb, who's my ranked number 2 greatest fighter. And we ended it at the beginning conversation of Ray Robinson. So what do we know about Ray Robinson? Well, let's talk about him. He won a 1938 New York Metropolitan AAU Open Class Championship in the Bantamweight division. He defeated a fighter by the name of Ed Chiarello. And it's got people thinking about New York fighters again, because Ray Robinson wasn't that well known at that point. And what was amazing about this is Ray Robinson was 15 years old. In order to get an AAU card, you have to be 18. So Robinson is actually younger than what his record says, because he's Walker Smith Jr. in his real life, but Ray Robinson in his boxing life. And from that point on, he became Ray Robinson to the world. There was a card that was still available in the Salem Crescent Club gym. Ray Robinson wanted to fight in the AAU tournament because you would get a $10 jewel watch. And these guys would sell it back and they would get the cash. But he started thinking about legacy early on in his career. And 1938 was a great year for black fighters, because in Cincinnati, you had a young man by the name of Ezzard Charles. As a featherweight, he would win a championship as well in the amateur division. So you had Ray Robinson, who won the Bantamweight New York Metropolitan AAU Championship. Ezzard Charles, who, by the way, sparred with Ray Robinson many times in those tournaments, in preparation for those tournaments. They knew each other quite well. And Ezzard Charles would win in the featherweight division. You had Charlie Burley, who would win the colored welterweight championship belt from Coco Kid that same year in 38. Henning Armstrong, who defeated Seferino Garcia in 38. He was champion, but he would win the welterweight championship belt from Barney Ross at the Madison Square Garden Bowl. And Henry Armstrong had already defeated Petey Cerrone in 1937. It was part of his 27 fights that he would have that year. Knock out all but one. And that's Aldi Spolby. But he would take the title away from Petey Cerrone. He would be the first black featherweight champion in Madison Square Garden. 1938, he would win the welterweight championship bout from Barney Ross. Then he would go back down to the lightweight division, and he would defeat Lou Ambers. This happened in 1938, so he was now the featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight champion in 1938. Now you had a light heavyweight champion by the name of John Henry Lewis. He had defeated Bob Olin in 1935. And in 1938, he was still champion before he was stripped for not defending his light heavyweight championship belt from Tiger Jack Fox. And the reason why he didn't defend it is because he didn't pass an eye examination test. And so since he didn't defend his title because of his eye examination test, he was stripped of his title. And then in 1939 of January, he would face Joe Louis. He would move up to face him. He would be knocked out in the first round. And towards the end of 39, his license would be revoked. But he would have the last laugh because he would have a fortune. Very smart man. And of course, Joe Louis, 1937, would knock out Jimmy Braddock in Comiskey Park in Chicago. So in 1938, he was champion as well in the heavyweight division. So 1938 was a great year for black fighters. So in 1939, Ray Robinson would move up to the featherweight division in New York Golden Gloves, and he would defeat a fighter by the name of Louis Spider Valentine. Now, he would also fight in the Inner City Golden Glove Championships, and at that time, Eddie Charles had moved up to the middleweight division. So he didn't face Eddie Charles as an amateur, but they sparred plenty of rounds. But he would defeat Louis Spider Valentine. Now, Harry Smith, the Harlem Thunderbolt, who became the colored middleweight champion in 1929 when he defeated Jack McVeigh. Before he passed away, he got jobs for Walker Smith, who was Ray Robinson, Louis Valentine, they called him Louis Spider Valentine, Danny Cox, who was the heavyweight, Joe Sandy Sadler, who was too young to work, but he hung around with those guys. Sadler was from Boston. He would eventually become the featherweight champion of the world. But Harry Smith would get these young men jobs at the Harlem Opera House. Now, that was located on 125th Street, not too far from the Teresa Hotel. So Valentine and Robinson knew one another. But Valentine was well respected in Harlem. And when Robinson defeated him, that's what made everybody realize that we have an up-and-coming young man coming out of Harlem. So Robinson would eventually move up to the lightweight division in 1940. Now Robinson would read a newspaper about Henning Armstrong going over and facing a fighter and defending his title. His name was Ernie Rudrick. And he said, I want to be like him. But Robinson's other influence was Joe Louis and Kid Chocolate. Matter of fact, Kid Chocolate influenced Henry Armstrong and Joe Louis, Ray Robinson, Charlie Burley, as well as Kid Gavilan. They all were influenced by Kid Chocolate. And so Robinson would compete in the 1940 Golden Gloves, inner city tournaments, as well as the New York Golden Gloves. And he would face a fighter by the name of Andy Nunelli. They called him Andy Nunel. And he knocked him out. I mean, what do we have here? Sports writers went nuts. They couldn't believe what they were watching. And Ray Robinson was a phenomenon. So in 1940, he would turn professional October 4th on the undercard of Henry Armstrong and Fitzy Zippy. And he would face a fighter by the name of Joe Escoveria. Joe Escoveria's name was Ray, but he also was known as Joe. Now, Ray Robinson was trained by a well-experienced, underrated trainer. His name was Harry Wiley Sr. And Harry Wiley Sr. used to hand wrap Sam Langford's hands. He would hand wrap his hands towards the end of Sam Langford's career. He was also a water boy for Jack Dempsey. He was in the gyms working with a lot of the top names that you know of. Tommy Lockman, many of them. But he wanted to open up a gym of his own, and he decided to get involved with the Harlem Sailor's Krebser Club on 124th Street. And it was designed for amateur fighters. And that's when he picked up Ray Robinson. But he was also a part of Grubb's Gym on 116th Street. That's where you had the pros. And Robinson was knocking out as a lightweight, middleweights in the Salem Crescent Club. So he had to go down to Grubb's Gym to get more sustained competition. And so you had Danny Cox, who was the heavyweight. That's who he spent a lot of time working out with. As a lightweight. So they wanted to turn him professional after the Golden Gloves. And he was on the undercard of Henning Armstrong and FISTICUFFS. And Ray Robinson would witness Henning Armstrong losing his title. And he wanted to get back at FISTICUFFS. But he wanted a title of his own. In 1941, he would face Sammy Engat, who was the NBA lightweight champion. Sammy Engat would face Davey Day. He would solidify with Luther Slugger White. And he would become the lightweight champion. But Sammy Engat didn't make weight. It was a title fight. And he heard the reputation of Ray Robinson. He was 4 pounds overweight, so it was a non-title fight. Ray Robinson would defeat Sammy Engat, but it would be for a non-title. Matter of fact, he defeated Sammy Engat every time he fought him, and he fought 3 times. Same thing that same year happened with Marty Servo. Ray Robinson would defeat Servo, but it wouldn't be for a title. And Harry Wiley Sr. saw this coming. He knew what was happening because that wasn't his first rodeo. He had trained Canada Lee and George Godfrey. He was in there with Muhammad Ali and Buster Masters Sr., Henning Armstrong and Joe Louis. He trained many, many others. So they wanted to go a different route. Let's move up to the welterweight division and dominate and stay there. Well, he couldn't get the fight with Marty Servo for the title. 1942, the war would begin, and Robinson had to wait from 42 to 46 to get a welterweight championship opportunity. He would face Tommy Bell, who's out of Ohio. And he would become the welterweight champion. He was dropped in the 6th round, and you couldn't hear a pin drop in Madison Square Garden. And when Robinson got up, the exhibition of boxing was a thing to behold. Now, as an amateur, he was 85 wins, 69 knockouts, and he knocked out 40 of his men in the very first round. And no one has ever seen anything like this. He went on to face fighters such as FISTICUFFS multiple times, Jake LaMotta 6 times, Carmen Basilio, Gene Fomer, Paul Pender, Terry Downs, Henry Armstrong. He fought Henry Armstrong in 1943. Randy Turpin in 51. Same year he fought Jake LaMotta for the middleweight championship belt. He was in there with Ralph Tiger Jones and Robert Villemain. As a matter of fact, with Robert Villemain, he would win the vacant Pennsylvania middleweight championship belt. Bobby Dykes. Here's the thing with Bobby Dykes. Bobby Dykes was from Texas. He was a southpaw. And he would be the first fighter, along with Kid Gavilan, to fight in a mixed race fight in the South since George Dixon and a fighter by the name of Jack Skelly. That fight took place in 1892, Carnival of Champions in New Orleans. And George Dixon would beat Jack Skelly so bad that they wouldn't allow mixed race fights in the South for 60 years. So in 1952, Bobby Dykes and Kid Gavilan would face one another. That would be the first time men of different race would have an opportunity to fight in the South. That's the distinction of Bobby Dykes. But he was a very good fighter out of Texas. Jose Basora, the first Puerto Rican middleweight that really put that culture on the map. Aaron Little Tiger Wade, the first black murderous row fighter that Ray Robinson would fight. He would also fight Burt Littell. who was a Black Murderers Row middleweight. Georgie Abrams, who along with Tony Zale would fight for the middleweight championship belt. O'Neal Bell was out of Detroit, very tough, durable fighter. Yet Artie Levine out of Brooklyn, who dropped Ray Robinson in Cleveland and knocked him out of the ring for a 20 count. Ray Robinson would make the count, but he would eventually knock out Artie Levine. Ray Robinson would state that Artie Levine was the hardest puncher he ever faced. Izzy Genazzo, Ralph Zanelli, California Jackie Wilson. California Jackie Wilson would be the fighter that Ray Robinson would fight after he would lose for the first time in 1943 against Jake LaMotta. And then 3 weeks later, he would face Jake LaMotta again, and he would defeat Jake LaMotta. In between that time, he would face California Jackie Wilson. Ruben Shank was in the ring with Rocky Graziano, very strong, but he would face him. So Ray Robinson was in the ring with some of the greatest fighters of his time. Gene Foreman, 3 times. Carmen Basilio, twice. Jake LaMotta, 6 times. Marty Servo, twice. Sammy Ingot, 3 times. Paul Pender, twice. Terry Downs, once. Henry Armstrong, once. Randy Turpin, twice. I mean, what more can you ask for? He was in the ring with young Gene Buffalo and George Sugar Costner twice. Knocked him out in the first round both times. Hell of a fighter was Ray Robinson. 1952, he would go up and meet Joey Maxim at New York Polo Grounds. And he would suffer from heat exhaustion. Potassium would leave his body. It was 104 degrees heat. And Ruby Goldstein was the referee. He had to be carried out of the ring and replaced by Ray Miller out of Chicago. And he couldn't answer the 14th round. Had he completed the fight, he would have been the light heavyweight champion because he won all but 1 round, up until the point of the stoppage. So let's take a look at some of the opponents that Ray Robinson would face. Ray Robinson would face Steve Belois, who was to your left. Pretty good fighter. He had a brother by the name of Mike Belois. They called him the Bronx Spider, Mike Belois. And he would face Henry Armstrong. And we'll see him when we show Henry Armstrong. George Sugar Costner, who is to your right. And Costner stated to Ray Robinson, "I'm the real sugar." Robinson got him in the middle of the ring when the referee was giving the instructions and said it won't last 1 round. And he got him out of there in 1 round. He would have a rematch, and he would knock him out in 1 round once again. And George Sugar Costner came over at an evening dance, and he wanted to congratulate Ray Robinson. But he asked Ray Robinson's wife if she would love to dance. Her name was Edna May. And Edna May told Ray Robinson he wants to dance with me. She said, "Go ahead and show him how to dance as I showed him how to fight." George Sugar Costner was something else. He wound up going blind. Carl Bobo Olsen, who became middleweight champion in 1953 when he defeated Randy Turpin. And Ray Robinson had relinquished his title after he lost in 1952 to Joey Maxim. And so they developed a tournament. And the last 2 men standing was Carl Bobo Olsen and Randy Turpin. And Carl Bobo Olsen would defeat Randy Turpin, and he would become the middleweight champion of the world. Now, he had faced Ray Robinson numerous amount of times. He was knocked out the majority of the time. He couldn't beat Ray Robinson. The only way he would become middleweight champion is when Ray Robinson retired. He would then face Randy Turpin. But he was from Hawaii. He was a very good fighter. He would wind up going up to the light heavyweight division and facing Archie Moore. And he would lose to Archie Moore in the light heavyweight division. Ray Robinson would face Jake LaMotta 6 times. He defeated him in 1942. Lost to him in 43 and then defeated him in 43. But 1951, St. Valentine's Day Massacre. February 14th. That would be the first time Jake LaMotta did not complete a round. He'd be stopped in the 13th round, beaten half to death. And Jake LaMotta was some fighter. Bronx Bull. Very underrated for his defense. He fought them all. Holman Williamson, Marcel Sedan, Ray Robinson, Bob Satterfield. Wow. Amazing fighter was Jake LaMotta. First time he was actually knocked off his feet and didn't complete a fight. So when he fought a fighter by the name of Danny Nardico. Danny Nardico had an outstanding war with Charlie Norcus. But Jake LaMotta was something else. Ray Robinson would take the title away from Jake LaMotta in 1951. He would lose it to the man to your right, Randy Turpin, in England. Randy Turpin had 4 brothers, but Dick Turpin was the best of the 4. Outside of himself, obviously. And Dick Turpin was in the ring with Davy Sands, who everyone wanted to see face Ray Robinson. Davy Sands had faced Carl Bobo Olsen, a man that we just showed you. And Davy Sands had, well, it was a total of 5 brothers. He was one of the 5. And they were getting that fight together with Ray Robinson. An unfortunate death happened. But Davy Sands' truck would overturn, and he would be killed. But Ray Robinson would face Randy Turpin once again in New York's Polo Grounds. Randy Turpin was knocked out because Ruby Goldstein would stop the action. And he almost won that fight because Ray Robinson was bleeding and he couldn't see out of his eye. And it was a fight doctor by the name of, can't think of his name right now. He's a fight doctor, very popular fight doctor. But he went over to the corner of Ray and said, "Ray, let me see your eyes." And Ruby Goldstein, her cut in front of the fight doctor. And he said, "Ray, they want me to stop it." And because of the respect they had for Harry Wiley Sr., they let it go one more round. And Ray Robinson would pin Randy Turpin to the ropes, and he would beat him half to death, body and head. Goldstein stepped in. Ray Robinson retained his title. Randy Turpin would eventually get knocked out in the first round by Tiberio Mitri. And then eventually, Randy Turpin would commit suicide. He was a great fighter. He and Carmen Basilio, Gene Fomer, Carl Bobo Olsen. In 1965, would give Ray Robinson a farewell to his career in New York's Madison Square Garden. And he would give Ray Robinson a big hug because they were very close. And shortly after that, he would pass away. Jake LaMotta wasn't there because he was still being investigated for a fight that he allegedly took a dive with Blackjack Billy Fox out of Philadelphia. Now to your right, you have Rocky Graziano. Rockabye Baby. He would become the middleweight champion in 1947 when he knocked out Tony Zale in the 6th round. But he'd be stopped in 1952 by the great Sugar Ray Robinson. But he was a very good fighter. Knew my dad very well. Trained in Stillman's gym and had wars with Harold Green out of Bronzeville, Brooklyn. They had real street fights. And to your left, that's Bobby Dykes. From Texas, the man that I explained to you fought Kid Gavilan. First mixed race fight in the South in 60 years. Sammy Ain got us to your right. He had held the NBA lightweight championship belt. And he didn't make weight when he fought Ray Robinson. And Ray Robinson had defeated Sammy Ain 3 times. But Ray Robinson always said that Sammy Ain had fast hands, fast feet, and he could fight. I met Ray Robinson twice, and he brought up the name of Sammy Ain, and he personally told me Sammy Ain was a hell of a fighter. To your left, you have Joey Chiarello. He would win a settlement against Reuben Hurricane Carter. He was portrayed in a movie that he was being beaten half to death all around the ring. When they showed the film, didn't show that. Joey Chiarello was some fighter. I met him personally. He had an interesting fight with Billy Graham, where they would reverse decision. They would reverse the decision, and first they had Billy Graham winning, and they would change it back to Joey Chiarello. But he had good fights with Gil Turner, and he fought Ray Robinson. He was from Brooklyn, New York, moved to Cherry Hill, then he wound up in Philadelphia. Phenomenal fighter he was. Now let's talk about Henning Armstrong. But before we do, Ray Robinson was named the Fighter of the Year in 1950 by the Boxing Writers Association. Fighter of the Year 1942 and 1951 by the Ring Magazine. He was introduced into the Ring Boxing Hall of Fame 1967. Named Welterweight Fighter of the Century and a Middleweight Fighter of the Century. I mean, that's an accomplishment all within itself. The Ring ranked Robinson as the best fighter in the last 80 years in 2002. He was introduced into the Georgia Sports Hall of Fame in 2006. He was ranked number 11, the greatest puncher of all time, in 2003. I mean, you can't ask for more from a fighter as far as his accomplishment is concerned. A lot of people don't understand. In 1941, Ray Robinson, he was a coach for the New York Golden Gloves, which means he traveled around to Chicago and many other places as he was a fighter. I mean, that's really phenomenal. So I just wanted to give some credit to Ray Robinson. I don't need to sell you on this. You already know he's the greatest pound-for-pound fighter. He could hook off the jab. 12 gauge, 9-12. Beautiful foot movement. He can knock you out going backwards. His IQ was basically number one. He was one of the greatest negotiators. He was able to keep the mob off of his back. He could have been a lightweight. He was a welterweight. He was a middleweight, multiple-time champion. He broke his own records. Beautiful 6-inch punch, converted into a 3-inch, and then a 9-inch punch, and knock you out in that sequence. Now, many claim that he ducked Charlie Burley. Ray Robinson was ranked number 1. Not only in the lightweight division, but he was ranked number 1 in the welterweight division. And Charlie Burley wasn't ranked in the top 5. After 38, when he defeated Coco Kid for the color championship, he dropped from number 3 to number 2. Fritzy Zivik dropped from number 2 to number 1. And Armstrong had defeated Severino Garcia. So when he did that, Fritzy Zivik was next in line. So when Fritzy Zivik faced Coco Kid, he faced Charlie Burley. When Fritzy Zivik faced Charlie Burley, after Fritzy Zivik moved down to number 1, when Armstrong dusted off Severino Garcia, Charlie Burley moved from number 3 after he defeated Coco Kid to number 2. So Charlie Burley had to face Fritzy Zivik. Charlie Burley lost to Fritzy Zivik. So it took him out of the top 5 ranking system. Ray Robinson was ranked number 1 in the lightweight and number 1 in the welterweight division when he turned professional in 1940. So Coco Kid and Charlie Burley had to work their way back up. By the time Ray Robinson turned professional and was promised an opportunity in 1941 against Sammy Ingot, Charlie Burley wasn't in the top 5 ranking. 1943, he would take the colored middleweight championship belt away from Holman Williams. So Ray Robinson wasn't a middleweight at that time. So they never really crossed paths, is my point. And if you're ranked number 1 Ray Robinson was already screwed when he fought Sammy Ingat, and Sammy Ingat didn't make weight. Robinson said, I'm not getting screwed again. I'm going to stay right where I am. And that's what happened with the Black Murderers Row. Burt Littell was ranked number 4 in 1944, but as a middleweight. So, salute to Ray Robinson. Number 4, I have Henning Armstrong, and he'll be the last one on this video. Henning Armstrong was named Melly Jackson, Homicide Hank. He was some fighter, fought from lightweight, from featherweight actually, to the middleweight division. He was 5 foot 5.5 inches, and he had a 67-inch reach. He was born December 12, 1912 in Columbus, Mississippi. He died October 24th, 1988 in Los Angeles, California. I had the pleasure of meeting him. He had a total fight career of 188 total bouts, 151 wins, 101 knockouts, 21 losses, and 9 draws. He got his professional debut July 28, 1931, and he would be knocked out in the 3rd round by Alamino. But he'd be in the ring with Severino Garcia in 1940. Fought him in 1938. He was in the ring with Lou Jenkins. Lou Jenkins had defeated Lou Ambers for the lightweight championship belt. 1937, he had 27 fights. He had 26 knockouts. He didn't knock out Aldo Spaldi to complete this 27 knockout streak. But along that route, he would pick up the featherweight championship belt by defeating Petey Cerrone. New York's Madison Square Garden, he would become the first black featherweight champion in boxing history. Now, when you look at Coco